Imagine walking through a museum. Statues of gods stare back at you, powerful, carved in stone, once worshipped by millions. But now, they're just exhibits. No prayers, no sacrifices, no fear. Once, these gods were everything. Today, they're nothing. And here's the unsettling question. If thousands of gods have already been abandoned, why do we assume the gods worshipped today are any different? Across history, civilizations created gods to explain the unknown, to enforce order, to promise meaning. Entire empires rose and fell under their names. Yet, every single time, belief eventually faded. Zeus, Ra, Odin, Quetzalcoatl, gods that once felt eternal, are now nothing more than trivia answers. But here's where it gets fascinating. These gods didn't die because they were disproven. They died because people stopped needing them. And that raises the real question: if belief itself can expire, what does that say about the gods still standing? In this video, we're not just looking at history. We're uncovering a pattern, a cycle of rise and collapse that challenges the very idea of eternal truth. By the end, you'll see belief not as a discovery of divine reality, but as a human invention that lives and dies with us. So, stay with me, because once you see how many gods humanity has already buried, you'll never look at modern religion the same way again. And if you value these deep dives into forbidden history, hit subscribe. It helps this channel keep going. The first forgotten gods. Let's start at the very beginning, with the world's first great civilization, the Sumerians, about 4,000 years ago. For them, gods weren't abstract ideas floating in the heavens. They were rulers of everything that mattered. Enlil, the storm god, controlled the winds and decided who would rule empires. Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water, was the problem solver of the pantheon. Inanna, goddess of love and war, could bless you with passion or destroy you with chaos. These weren't bedtime stories. They were living authorities people genuinely believed controlled floods, famines, wars, and harvests. Temples weren't side attractions. They were the center of city life. Priests managed rituals, farmers offered sacrifices, rulers claimed their power directly from the gods. Without divine favor, there was no legitimacy, no safety, no order. And yet, they're gone. Not just their empires, but their gods themselves. No one prays to Enlil to calm the wind anymore. No one begs Inanna for victory in battle. These gods didn't fade because they were disproven. They vanished because their civilizations collapsed, and when the people disappeared, so did their gods. That's the pattern we'll see over and over. Gods die when cultures die. And here's the unsettling part. If a god is truly eternal, why should their survival depend on fragile human empires? If the first gods of civilization could vanish without a trace, what does that say about the ones worshipped today? Because remember, to the Sumerians, these gods were as real and permanent as any god you've ever heard of. They never imagined a future where their temples were ruins and their gods reduced to archaeology footnotes. So ask yourself, if the first gods humanity worshipped could be forgotten, how many more are still waiting to be abandoned? Egypt's vanished pantheon. If any civilization seemed built to last forever, it was ancient Egypt. For over 3,000 years, their gods ruled life, death, and everything in between. Ra, the sun god, was believed to sail across the sky each day in his golden boat, battling darkness each night before rising again. Osiris judged the souls of the dead, weighing hearts against a feather to decide eternal fate. And Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the underworld, oversaw the sacred rituals of mummification. These weren't symbolic images. Egyptians believed their eternal destiny depended on them. Pharaohs weren't just kings, they were gods in human form. Their authority was divine by definition. Temples towered across the Nile, packed with offerings, hymns, and sacrifices. Entire industries existed to honor the gods, from priests to tomb builders, from artists to farmers, contributing grain for rituals. To doubt the gods wasn't just heresy, it was unthinkable. And yet, here we are. Millions of people visit the pyramids every year, but not one of them kneels before Ra in prayer. The gods that shaped one of history's greatest civilizations now exist only as art in museums, stripped of all their sacred power. So what happened? Conquest, for one. Greeks, Romans, and later Christians imposed new gods, new narratives. Over centuries, Egypt's pantheon was slowly pushed aside until devotion turned to dust. The temples crumbled, the rituals faded, and the once eternal gods became relics. And this leaves us with a piercing question. If the gods of Egypt could vanish after thousands of years of worship, what does eternal really mean? Was their power divine, or was it always sustained by human belief, by the repetition of stories, by the rituals of culture? Because to the Egyptians, Osiris and Ra were as undeniable as gravity. They didn't expect their gods to become museum pieces. Yet today, their immortality exists only in memory, not in faith. If gods can be forgotten after ruling for millennia, what does that say about the ones still worshipped today? The Olympian illusion. Picture ancient Greece. Temples rising above city-states, smoke from sacrifices curling into the sky, and prayers whispered to the mighty Olympians. Zeus, king of the gods, hurled thunderbolts to enforce order. Athena guided wisdom and war. Apollo ruled music, healing, and prophecy. These weren't distant metaphors. To the Greeks, the Olympians were as real as the mountains they stood on. Festivals like the Olympic Games were dedicated to them. The Delphic oracle spoke with their authority, shaping political decisions and personal fates. People offered sacrifices, consulted priests, and feared the gods' wrath if they disobeyed. The pantheon wasn't entertainment, it was the backbone of law, culture, and daily life. But fast forward to today. Mount Olympus is a tourist attraction. Zeus is a character in video games. Athena is a symbol on coins. No one seriously believes they control storms, wars, or destiny anymore. The gods that once inspired entire civilizations are now filed under mythology. So what happened? It wasn't that anyone disproved Zeus with a scientific experiment. It wasn't that Apollo's shrine stopped working overnight. Belief collapsed because the culture around it changed. As knowledge advanced, as empires rose and fell, the gods stopped being necessary. Their stories no longer explained enough, and their rituals no longer bound society together. And here's the unsettling part. To the Greeks, these gods were unshakable truths. Generations lived and died in total devotion. Yet within a few centuries, belief melted away until all that was left was myth. So ask yourself, if the Olympians, once the most powerful gods in the world, could vanish into legend, what makes today's gods immune? The illusion of permanence is exactly that, an illusion. And history shows us, again and again, that gods don't die because they're disproven. They die because people stop believing. Rome, gods as politics. If Greece gave us myth, Rome gave us strategy. The Romans were less interested in whether their gods were true, and more interested in whether they were useful. They absorbed the Greek pantheon wholesale, swapping names like a branding exercise. Zeus became Jupiter. Athena became Minerva. Hermes turned into Mercury. Religion wasn't just personal faith, it was civic duty. To honor the gods was to honor the empire itself. Festivals kept people loyal. Temples projected power. Sacrifices maintained the illusion of cosmic order. The Romans were pragmatic too. They allowed foreign gods into their empire as long as they didn't threaten stability. Egyptian Isis? Fine. Persian Mithras? Welcome. Rome treated gods like tools in a political toolbox. If a new cult kept people obedient, it was tolerated. If it caused unrest, it was crushed. But even with this flexibility, the Roman gods didn't last. By the 4th century, Christianity surged through the empire. The old temples were shut down. Pagan rituals were outlawed. Statues were toppled, sometimes recycled into churches. In just a few generations, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, once essential to Roman identity, were forgotten as living gods. And here's the twist. The Romans didn't stop worshiping their gods because they lost an argument. They stopped because a new system of belief became more powerful, more organized, and better at enforcing loyalty. Religion in Rome wasn't about eternity. It was about empire. And when the empire shifted, so did the gods. That raises an uncomfortable question. If divine truth can be replaced by political convenience, was it ever divine at all? Rome teaches us this. Gods don't just live in heaven. They live in politics, in culture, in the fragile machinery of human power. And when that machine changes, gods die. The Northmen's lost faith. Travel north into the cold winds of Scandinavia. Here, gods weren't distant abstractions. They were fierce companions in war, harvest, and survival. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, traded his eye for wisdom. Thor, hammer in hand, defended both gods and humans from giants. Freya blessed fertility and love, but demanded offerings in return. To the Vikings, these gods were not stories. They were forces shaping every storm at sea, every crop in the field, every raid across the horizon. Sacrifices, even human ones, were offered to win favor. Viking ships were blessed in the names of Odin and Thor before setting sail. Without their gods, life itself felt impossible. And yet, those gods are gone, not disproven, simply abandoned. When Christianity arrived in the north, it didn't destroy Odin overnight. Belief didn't collapse in a single battle. It eroded slowly, over generations. Children stopped being raised on sagas as truth. Villages built churches where temples once stood. The gods faded, not because they failed, but because people stopped passing them down. Think about that. Thor, once the thunder in the sky, is now a Marvel superhero. Odin, once the All-Father, is reduced to folklore. Freya is remembered mostly in names and scattered traditions. For centuries they were worshipped with blood, prayer, and devotion. And today, they survive only as myth. So what does that mean? If even gods drenched in ritual, sacrifice, and fear can disappear, how solid is any claim of divinity? The Northmen never thought their gods would vanish. But history shows us a hard truth. Gods die not with a bang, but with silence. Not because they're disproven, but because people stop teaching their names. And if it happened to Odin and Thor, what makes today's gods any different? Blood and conquest in the Americas. Across the Atlantic, in the heart of Central and South America, gods demanded more than prayers. They demanded blood. The Aztecs believed the sun itself would die without sacrifice. So thousands of hearts were offered to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the Sunday. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a creator and protector, tied to learning and renewal. The Maya turned to gods like Chak, who ruled the rain, and Itzamna, who oversaw creation itself. These weren't symbolic figures, they were life and death. Every harvest, every battle, every breath was tied to pleasing them. Entire cities were built around their temples. Rituals weren't optional, they were survival. To doubt the gods was to invite catastrophe. But then came the Spanish, armed with steel, gunpowder, and a new god. Temples were burned, idols smashed, priests executed. Conversions weren't just preached, they were enforced. Within a generation, centuries of devotion collapsed. The old gods went from being the center of life to forbidden names whispered only in secret. Today, their pyramids stand as tourist attractions. Their myths are retold in history books and museums. But no one offers their heart to Huitzilopochtli anymore. No one prays to Quetzalcoatl for the rising Sunday. And here's the unsettling truth. These gods didn't vanish because they were disproven. They vanished because another system of power, backed by conquest, erased them. Which raises the question, if gods can be replaced by force, were they ever eternal? Or are they only as strong as the civilizations that protect them? Because to the Aztecs and Maya, these gods were unquestionable reality, just as real to them as any god is to believers today. And yet, their eternity lasted only as long as their empires. Gods that mutated instead of died. Not every god disappears in silence. Some survive by changing shape. Nowhere is this clearer than in India. The earliest layers of Hindu belief, the Vedic tradition, centered on gods that most people today barely recognize. Indra, the storm god, was king of the heavens. Agni, god of fire, carried sacrifices to the divine. Varuna ruled cosmic order and the oceans. For centuries, hymns and rituals in their honor were the heartbeat of spiritual life. But here's the twist. These gods didn't vanish completely. They were transformed. Over time, as philosophy deepened and society shifted, new deities rose to prominence. Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi came to dominate. Indra faded into the background. Agni became more symbolic than literal. Varuna all but disappeared. The Vedic gods were absorbed, redefined, or quietly forgotten. It wasn't a debate over truth, it was adaptation. Belief evolved to match new needs, new values, and new ways of explaining the universe. The gods that survived weren't necessarily the most real, they were the most flexible. And that reveals something crucial. Divinity isn't fixed. It bends to culture, to philosophy, to time. Gods don't live outside of human change, they live inside it. Think about it. If eternal gods can be rewritten, reshaped, and even demoted within the same religion, what does that say about their permanence? For the ancient Vedic people, Indra's thunder was absolute. Today, he's a minor character in Hindu mythology. His eternity lasted only as long as his relevance. So the question becomes, are gods eternal beings, or just evolving symbols that live and die with culture? The Vedic pantheon shows us, sometimes gods don't die outright, they mutate. But even mutation is proof that they're human ideas adapting to survive. The endless pattern. By now, the story should feel familiar. Gods rise, gods fall. And it's not just the Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, or Vikings. The pattern repeats everywhere. Take Baal, worshipped across the ancient Near East. He was so influential that even the Bible treated him as a rival to Yahweh. Baal had temples, priests, and millions of followers. Today, he's reduced to a villain in scripture, a footnote in archaeology. Or Mithras, a god who once rivaled early Christianity in the Roman Empire. His cult spread through underground temples with rituals of bread, wine, and salvation. To his followers, Mithras wasn't myth. He was the answer. Yet when Christianity gained power, Mithras disappeared almost overnight. Then there's Ahura Mazda, the great god of Zoroastrianism. For centuries, he was worshipped as the supreme creator, with fire temples blazing in his honor. Persian kings claimed his authority. Zoroastrianism even influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam with its ideas of heaven, hell, angels, and demons. But today, Ahura Mazda is mostly forgotten outside of textbooks, with only a small minority still keeping the faith alive. These weren't minor gods. They were once central to entire civilizations, worshipped with absolute devotion. And now they're gone. Not disproven, not refuted, just abandoned. That's the real pattern. Gods don't die in debate, they die in silence. They fade when cultures shift, when children stop repeating their names, when rituals lose their grip. So here's the uncomfortable thought. If Baal, Mithras, and Ahura Mazda could all vanish after centuries of being eternal, what makes today's gods any different? Because history isn't just a graveyard of forgotten deities. It's a mirror, showing us what always happens. Gods are born, they rise, they dominate, and eventually, they fall. And the cycle never stops. The modern exodus. The decline of gods isn't just ancient history. It's happening right now, in front of us. Look at Scandinavia, once the land of Odin, Thor, and Freya. Later, it became fiercely Christian. Today, countries like Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are among the least religious on earth. The churches are still there, but they're more like wedding venues and tourist stops than sacred spaces. Belief didn't collapse overnight, it just faded, one generation at a time. The same trend shows up across Europe. In the Netherlands, more than half the population says they don't believe in God. In the Czech Republic, religion is almost irrelevant to daily life. Even in Ireland, once dominated by Catholicism, church attendance has plummeted in just a few decades. And it isn't just Europe. In the United States, long seen as one of the most religious Western nations, belief is slipping fast. A 2021 Gallup poll showed church membership falling below 50% for the first time in American history. Among younger generations, the numbers are even more dramatic. In some surveys, nearly half of people under 30 identify as non-religious. It's not because a new prophet arrived to disprove old beliefs. It's not because science suddenly answered every mystery. The real reason is simpler. Belief is fragile without reinforcement. When rituals fade, when institutions lose trust, when children aren't taught to repeat the stories, gods wither quietly. And that raises a haunting question. If the gods of today are already losing followers, are they on the same trajectory as Ra, Zeus, and Odin? Think about it. Every abandoned god in history once had millions who believed with unshakable certainty. They built temples, offered sacrifices, and swore their devotion. Now, those names are carved on museum plaques. So when you see religion fading in our own time, it's not an anomaly. It's the continuation of the oldest pattern in human history. Gods rise, gods rule, and then gods vanish. Which leads to the final question. If every god so far has been abandoned, what makes anyone think the current ones will be the exception? The fragile future of belief. Every religion alive today claims permanence. Believers insist their God is different, not like Ra, not like Zeus, not like Odin. This one, they say, is eternal. But history whispers a different story. Every god, from Sumer to Rome, was once considered the final truth. And every one of them is now mythology. The uncomfortable truth is that belief doesn't survive because it's true. Belief survives because it's inherited. Parents teach it, institutions reinforce it, rituals repeat it. Without that repetition, faith fades like an untended fire. Think about it. If no one taught children to pray, would any religion last more than a single generation? The evidence is all around us. The Norse gods vanished when new rulers stopped teaching their names. The Egyptian pantheon collapsed when foreign conquerors rewrote the narrative. Even within Christianity, entire branches of belief, saints, rituals, doctrines have quietly disappeared over time. Not because they were disproven, but because they weren't passed down. And here we are, in the 21st century, watching belief unravel in real time. In country after country, younger generations are walking away from faith. Not in anger, not in protest, simply in indifference. They aren't inheriting the same devotion as their parents. And once the chain of inheritance breaks, gods begin to die. That's why the eternity of today's religions is fragile. Their survival doesn't depend on divine power. It depends on whether humans keep the stories alive. And history shows we rarely do forever. So ask yourself, if thousands of gods once worshipped as ultimate truth are now museum relics, what makes today's gods any different? Are they immune to the same fate, or simply waiting for their turn to be forgotten? Because if history has taught us anything, it's this. Belief isn't a permanent destination, it's a cycle. Gods are born, they rise, they rule, and eventually, they vanish. The only real question is, which of today's gods will be next? The gods we haven't buried yet. So now you've seen the pattern. Thousands of gods once worshipped as eternal have already vanished. Their temples are ruins, their names are trivia, their power is silence. And yet, every believer alive today insists, our God is different. This one will last. But history says otherwise. Here's the unsettling truth. Gods don't die because they're disproven. They die because people stop believing. They vanish when stories stop being told. They fade when rituals turn into empty habits. And that raises the question no one dares to ask. Are we watching the gods of today quietly slide toward the same fate? Because if history is consistent, belief isn't forever. It's fragile, and every generation decides whether to keep carrying it or to let it go. Now, if this video made you pause, rethink, or even feel a spark of doubt, that's a good thing. It means you're paying attention. And here's my challenge to you. Don't stop here. There are even deeper questions we need to face. Questions about how religions were engineered to hold power and why even forgotten gods still shape our world today. So, if you found value in this journey, support this channel by subscribing. It means a lot, and it helps bring more hidden truths like this into the light. Because the story of gods isn't over, and neither is ours.